Leigh Novak noticed the cologne on a Thursday in October. Not that Brooks wore it. She had known for 9 years that he kept the same bottle on the bathroom shelf, a dark, resinous scent that she associated with the early months of their marriage, with the particular Saturday mornings when neither of them had anywhere to be. He wore it for important things, job interviews, client dinners that mattered. He had started wearing it on Thursdays, and coming home at 10:30, and kissing her on the cheek in the hallway with the easy warmth of a man who has nothing to explain. Leigh was a senior financial investigator at Harwick and Dean, a boutique fraud detection firm with offices on the 32nd floor of a building on 6th Avenue. She had spent 11 years reading the space between what financial documents said and what they actually meant. She understood professionally that the most significant patterns are the ones that appear ordinary, that the tell is almost never a dramatic error. It is a small recurring deviation that the person generating it has stopped noticing because they've done it long enough. She had been noticing Brooks's Thursday deviation for 2 months. On a Tuesday morning in November, while Brooks was on a call in the home office, she opened his laptop. He had given her the password 2 years ago when he was traveling, and looked at his calendar. The Thursday entries read, TCA Review, Offsite. She knew Brooks's firm's client list. TCA was not on it. She went back 12 weeks. Every Thursday, TCA Review, Offsite. She closed the laptop exactly as she had found it. She sat at the kitchen table for 22 minutes. Then she went to work. She did not say anything to Brooks that evening. She began instead to build the case the way she built every case, from the facts outward, not from the conclusion inward. By the end of the week, she had found the card, not in his wallet, in the inside lining of his winter coat, which she was taking to the dry cleaner, a credit card in his name, from a bank they did not jointly use, with a billing address at his firm's Park Avenue office. She photographed it. She put it back. She spent the weekend being normal. On Monday, she ran the card number through a personal finance tracking tool she had access to through her firm. Not for the account, but for the merchant category patterns associated with the card's activity signature. Hotels, Midtown, Thursdays. Leigh sat at her desk and looked at the screen. She had spent 11 years being certain before she moved. She was certain. She began planning. What she planned was, ethically, not defensible, but it was going to tell her the truth, and she had decided that the truth, whatever shape it took, was the only thing she was interested in now. Leigh Novak had been the kind of child who read the fine print, not metaphorically, literally. She had, at 12, read the terms and conditions of a contest her school was running, and pointed out to her teacher that the prize description and the entry rules were legally inconsistent. Her teacher had been annoyed. The school had quietly fixed the contest rules. She had grown up in Cleveland, the daughter of an accountant father and a high school English teacher mother, who had instilled in her, between them, an equal reverence for accuracy and for the precise weight of words. She had moved to New York at 22 for graduate school in financial forensics and had stayed because the city suited her specific kind of attention. It rewarded people who noticed things. She had met Brooks Novak at a professional conference in Midtown, which was not a romantic setting, but which had turned out to be the correct one, because they had spent the first 40 minutes arguing about the interpretation of a forensic accounting methodology being presented, and by the end of the argument they had established, without meaning to, that they were both more interested in each other than in anything else in the room. They had been together for 4 years before the wedding. The wedding was small, 40 people, a restaurant in Tribeca they both loved, her mother cried. Brooks had written his own vows. They were precise and warm, and had made Leigh, who did not cry easily, cry. The marriage had been, for 8 years, the thing she had believed it would be, not performed, not decorated. Genuinely, dailily good. 2 people who came home to each other at the end of hard days and found the return worth making, which was what made the card in the coat lining so disorienting. Not the abstract possibility of betrayal. She had processed enough financial fraud in divorce proceedings to have no illusions about what marriages could become. What was disorienting was the card in the coat she had bought him for his birthday. The deliberate use of the familiar and beloved to hide something. She was not a woman who fell apart on incomplete information. She would fall apart later when the information was complete, if falling apart was what the complete information warranted. For now, she worked. Getting the fraudulent death notification required one favor and one moral compromise. The favor was from a county records administrator she had worked with on a case 3 years prior. A woman named Rosa, who understood from the nature of Leigh's work that occasionally unusual documentation requests had legitimate investigative purposes. Leigh did not lie to Rosa about her reasons. She told her, precisely, that she needed a formatted death registration notification bearing her own name for the purpose of testing a person's response to her death. Which was true, if incomplete. Rosa made it clear she was providing a document with no official seal and no legal standing, formatted to appear plausible for approximately 72 hours to a non-specialist. Leigh accepted these terms. The moral compromise was the part she sat with longer. She sat with it for 3 days before she mailed the envelope. She thought about what kind of person does this. She thought about the card, the Thursdays, the cologne, the TCA review entries in a calendar that had no TCA client. She thought about 9 years of a marriage she had believed was one thing, and the accumulated weight of 2 months of believing she had been wrong. She mailed it. She addressed it to Brooks's office. She used the name of a legitimate funeral home in a Queens neighborhood where she had a professional association. She listed herself as the deceased and Brooks as next of kin. Then she drove to Petra Ossi's apartment in Brooklyn Heights. Petra was her oldest New York friend. They had met in graduate school, and Petra had become, over 15 years, the person Leigh called when things were real rather than manageable. Leigh had told her only that she needed a few days and asked no questions. Petra, who knew Leigh well enough to understand that the request itself was the information, had said come. Leigh sat in the guest room with her laptop and her phone, and the particular focused stillness of a woman who has made a decision and is now in the part that comes after. She waited. Brooks called her cell at 4:47 p.m. She did not answer. He called again at 5:23. She watched the calls arrive. She noted, with the specific professional detachment she could access when the data was too close, the timing, the frequency, the absence of a voicemail on the first call, and the 30-second voicemail on the second. She did not listen to the voicemail. Not yet. She was waiting to see what he did next. She would not be prepared for what he did next. Nobody would have been prepared for what he did next. Brooks Novak received the envelope at 3:11 p.m. His assistant had placed it in his afternoon correspondence tray. He saw the return address, a Queen's funeral home, and opened it with the mild attention of someone expecting a misdirected piece of mail. He read the notification once. His face did not move. He read it again. Then he called Leigh's cell. No answer. He called her office. Her colleague, carefully, said she had taken personal days. He called Petra. Petra said, with precision, that she had spoken to Leigh recently, and that Leigh had seemed tired. Brooks Novak did not go to the Midtown Hotel. He left his office at 3:45 p.m. His assistant would later note that he had canceled 3 meetings, which Brooks Novak had never done before, and he drove to a building on East 54th Street that had nothing to do with hotels or Thursday evenings. It was the offices of a law firm. He sat in the parking garage for 9 minutes. Then he went inside. What Leigh did not know, what the hotel charge and the calendar entries and the secret card could not have told her, was why Brooks had been at the Midtown Hotel on Thursday nights for the past 12 weeks. She was about to find out, and it was not going to be what she had concluded. It was going to be so far from what she had concluded that the distance itself would be the first thing she would have to reckon with. Leigh arrived at the Midtown Hotel on a Thursday at 9 p.m. She had obtained a keycard to the firm's reserved conference room, a room she had confirmed existed through the hotel's corporate account records, which she accessed through a professional subscription her firm maintained. It was a room Brooks's M&A firm used for client meetings and, on Thursday nights, for something she had not yet named. The hotel was a Park Avenue property, the kind with dark wood paneling and carpets that absorbed sound the way expensive things absorb evidence of themselves. She took the elevator to the 6th floor. The hallway was quiet, warm lighting, the smell of cut flowers from an arrangement near the elevator bank. She walked to room 614. She stood outside it. She listened. She heard voices. 2 of them. One was Brooks. The other was a voice she did not recognize, male, low, with the specific controlled tension of someone running out of arguments. What the voice was saying was not what she had spent 2 months bracing herself to hear. What it was saying was, "The Whitmore account closes in 9 days. If you cooperate voluntarily before then, you walk away. If you don't, your name is on everything. Both of ours are. But yours is the one that survives the way it was constructed." Leigh stood in the hallway with her hand on the door handle. She did not move. She listened, and Brooks said, "I'm not signing anything. I've told you that for 6 weeks. I'm not protecting your exposure by adding mine." And the other voice said, "Then your wife's firm is going to receive a very interesting dossier on Monday morning, and she'll open it at her desk before you get a chance to call her." Leigh used the keycard. She opened the door, and Brooks Novak looked at his wife standing in the doorway of a hotel conference room and did what she had not seen him do in 9 years of marriage. He looked completely, entirely relieved. The man across the table from Brooks was named Ren Calloway. Leigh recognized the name before she recognized the face. She had encountered it 6 months ago in the margins of a case her firm had been tangentially reviewing. A corporate restructuring with anomalies in the disbursement records. The Calloway name had appeared as a beneficial interest holder in one of the restructured entities. It had not been the focus of the case. It had not risen to the level of a finding. She looked at him now with the specific quality of attention she brought to documents that were lying about what they were. Ren Calloway was mid-40s. He had the groomed, deliberate appearance of a man who had learned that looking expensive is its own form of argument. He was also, Leigh could see, recalculating. He had been in the middle of applying significant leverage to Brooks Novak. He had not anticipated Brooks Novak's wife entering the room. He had especially not anticipated that Brooks Novak's wife was Leigh Novak of Harwick and Dean, whose name, he now appeared to be computing, was on documentation he had spent 9 weeks constructing. "Ms. Novak?" he said. His voice had the practiced warmth of a man who was buying himself 30 seconds. "Mr. Calloway?" she said. She set her bag on the table and sat down. "Tell me about the dossier you were planning to send to my firm on Monday." A pause. "I don't think—" "You mentioned it 12 seconds ago," she said. "I heard you through the door." She looked at him steadily. "Tell me what's in it." The room was very quiet. Brooks looked at his wife. Leigh looked at Wren Calloway. Wren Calloway made a decision. The wrong one, as it turned out, though it took him a moment to understand that. "There's a set of documentation," he said, "linking your professional credentials to a series of fiduciary authorizations on accounts you've never reviewed. The documentation suggests you acted as a consulting fiduciary on a fund that has been, let's say, unenthusiastically managed." "Forged credentials," Leigh said. "Carefully constructed," Wren said. "Who built the structure?" Leigh said. "I'm afraid that's June Whitmore," Brooks said, from across the table. The room went very quiet again. Wren's composure shifted, not broke, but shifted, the way a building shifts when the foundation has been touched. Leigh looked at her husband. "How long have you known about Whitmore?" she said. 8 weeks, Brooks said, "since the second Thursday." "And you didn't tell me." "He was going to use your license," Brooks said. "I was trying to find a way to dismantle it that didn't run through your firm. I was afraid that if I told you, your professional obligation to report would get ahead of our ability to control the narrative," Leigh said. "Yes." She looked at him. "You were protecting me." "I was protecting both of us," he said. "Badly." "Yes," she said. "Badly." She turned back to Wren Calloway. "Where is the documentation currently?" He looked at her. She held his eyes without expression. He told her. 12 weeks earlier, Brooks Novak had received a call from a colleague at another firm about an M&A deal that had been structured with what the colleague described as unusual accounting positions in the disbursement schedule. The deal involved a fund controlled, several layers of corporate structure deep, by a woman named June Whitmore. June Whitmore was 63 years old and had spent 30 years in private equity with the quiet, structural power of someone who preferred to work where the documentation didn't require her name at the front of things. She had been, over that time, involved in several transactions that had produced significant returns for their principals, and had left, in their wake, certain parties with legitimate grievances and limited legal recourse. She was also, Brooks had discovered in the 3rd week of his investigation, the architect of a documentation structure that included, as one of its key fiduciary authorizations, a signature in the name of Leigh Novak. Not Leigh's actual signature, a constructed one, built from publicly available documentation and applied to internal fund records that would not, under normal circumstances, receive the level of scrutiny that would expose the construction, unless Leigh's own firm received the records as part of a fraud complaint, which was exactly what Wren Calloway, who served as June Whitmore's operational interface, her visible face in transactions she preferred not to appear in, had been preparing to trigger if Brooks did not cooperate. The cooperation they were asking for was specific: a set of confirmatory signatures on M&A deal documentation that would validate the fund's position and provide a transaction paper trail that looked, from the outside, like a legitimate arm's-length deal. Brooks had refused. For 12 weeks, he had been meeting with Wren Calloway on Thursday evenings, not to negotiate, but to document, to build a record of the threats and the demands that could, at the right moment, be delivered to the right authority. He had been wearing the cologne because Thursday evenings frightened him. He had worn the cologne, Leigh remembered now, the night of his bar passage interview, the morning his father was in the hospital, the day Leo, their dog, had died. He wore it when he was afraid and needed to feel like himself. She had catalogued it as evidence of something it was not. She would think about that for a long time. Leigh made 2 calls from the hotel room while Wren Calloway sat at the table and Brooks stood by the window. The first call was to her firm's after-hours line, where she left a recorded message for her supervising partner, flagging a potential conflict of interest that required a Monday morning discussion. The second call was to Cole Deering. Cole was a white-collar criminal defense and financial crimes attorney she had worked with on 3 cases over the past 6 years. He was 44, meticulous, and had the specific quality of mind that made him excellent at cases where the documentation had been deliberately constructed to implicate the wrong person. He answered on the 3rd ring. "It's Leigh Novak," she said. "It's 10:15 on a Thursday," he said. "I know," she said. "I have a situation." A pause. "How bad?" "Forged professional credentials, a June Whitmore structure, blackmail documentation being held at a location I'm going to text you, and a man named Wren Calloway, sitting across a table from me, who is currently deciding whether his situation improves or worsens by cooperating." A longer pause. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Cole said. Leigh hung up. She looked at Wren Calloway. "My attorney will be here in 40 minutes, she said. "I'd suggest you use that time to think carefully about the difference between being a witness and being a defendant. Because right now, you are positioned to be either, and which one you become depends almost entirely on the next conversation." Wren Calloway looked at the woman across the table who had walked into this room 20 minutes ago and had systematically made every advantage he had believed he held disappear. He picked up his own phone. He called his attorney. This was the correct decision. It was the only correct decision he had made in 12 weeks. While Brooks had been building a documentation record of Calloway's threats, Leigh had been building something else entirely. 6 months earlier, working a separate corporate fraud case for her firm's banking client, Leigh had flagged a disbursement anomaly in a fund associated with a private equity vehicle. The fund's beneficial interest records had shown a name she did not recognize at the time, a name registered through a Delaware LLC that was 2 steps removed from a more prominent structure. She had noted it. She had filed it in the case records as a tangential finding. She had moved on. The name had been Calloway Whitmore Capital. She had not connected it to her husband because she had not known there was a connection to make. When Cole Deering arrived at the hotel at 10:52 p.m., and they spent the next 2 hours laying out what each of them had: Leigh's tangential case finding, Brooks's 12 weeks of documented threats, Wren Calloway's increasingly cooperative account of June Whitmore's structure. What emerged was not two separate situations. It was one. Leigh had been inserted into the Whitmore documentation specifically because she worked in financial fraud detection. A fiduciary authorization bearing her credentials on a fraudulent fund had two functions. It provided a legitimate appearing name for the structure, and it created a weapon, something that could be used to redirect any investigation that came too close, by implicating the investigator herself. June Whitmore had not selected Leigh randomly. She had selected her because Leigh was proximate, through Brooks's firm, and because a woman with Leigh's professional standing, implicated in a fraud scheme, would consume significant institutional attention and resources that would otherwise be directed at the actual structure. Leigh was the distraction. She had been the distraction for 6 months without knowing it. Cole Deering laid this out with the flat precision of a man who had seen similar constructions before and found them no less infuriating for the familiarity. "She picked you," he said, "because you're good at your job. She needed someone credible enough that the implication would stick." Leigh looked at the documents spread across the hotel conference table. "She also needed someone who wouldn't immediately recognize the construction," Leigh said. "You would have?" Cole said. "Eventually." "She was counting on eventually being too late," Leigh said. "Yes." Leigh looked at the documents. "It wasn't too late," she said. "No," Cole said. "It was not." Cole Deering's associate called at 1:17 a.m. The associate had been dispatched to the location where Wren Calloway had indicated the documentation was held, a storage facility in Midtown used by Calloway's firm for sensitive materials. The associate confirmed the documentation was there. She also confirmed that it had been accessed 4 hours earlier, and that a copy had already been transmitted. Not to Leigh's firm, not on Monday, tonight. It had been sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission's regional tip line. An anonymous submission filed at 9:04 p.m., 44 minutes before Leigh had walked into the hotel room. Leigh had not been the intended recipient of the dossier. She had been the subject of it. June Whitmore, monitoring the situation through a channel Leigh had not yet identified, had apparently calculated that Wren Calloway's Thursday meeting was deteriorating and had moved the timeline forward. The submission to the SEC was designed to open a formal inquiry before Leigh could access the documentation, contextualize it, or produce a rebuttal. If the inquiry opened first, Leigh's professional standing would be compromised before she could speak. The room was very quiet. Brooks looked at his wife. Cole Deering looked at the screen showing the transmission timestamp. Leigh sat for 11 seconds. Then she said, "What time does the SEC's fraud tip system generate an intake confirmation?" Cole checked. "Within 30 minutes of submission," he said. "It would have generated at 9:34. "So the intake record exists," Leigh said. "Yes." "Can we access the intake record as a named subject?" Cole was already typing. "We can file a subject access request," he said. "First thing Monday." "Before that," Leigh said. "I know the intake officer on the regional financial fraud desk. We were on a panel together in March." She picked up her phone. "She is going to be annoyed that I'm calling at 1:15 in the morning." "Is that a reason not to call?" Cole asked. "No," Leigh said. "It is not." She called. Her contact was annoyed. She was also, once she understood what Leigh was describing, extremely attentive. The next afternoon, Leigh was at Petra's apartment, running on 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee, when Dinah arrived. Leigh Novak was Brooks's younger sister, 34, and she had brought her 8-year-old son Felix to visit Petra because she didn't know any of what had happened and had texted Petra about a Saturday afternoon visit that Petra had not cancelled. Felix was 8 and had the focused, relentless curiosity of a child who treated the world as a set of puzzles requiring immediate attention. He had arrived and immediately identified that several adults in the room were behaving differently than usual. He sat next to Leigh on the couch. "You look like when Mom gets bad news," Felix said. "That's a specific observation," Leigh said. "She gets quiet and makes a lot of coffee," he said. "You've had 3 cups since we got here. I counted." Leigh looked at the 8-year-old. "I'm going through something," she said. "Is Uncle Brooks in trouble?" Leigh paused. "It's being handled," she said carefully. Felix thought about this. "He's not a bad person," Felix said. "I know because when I fall off my bike, he doesn't say, 'You should have been more careful.' He just asks if I'm okay first, and then we figure out what happened." Leigh looked at her nephew. She thought about the hotel conference table, about Brooks's face when she had walked through the door, not guilty, not caught, but relieved in the particular way of a man who has been holding something alone for too long. "You're right," she said. "He's not a bad person." Felix nodded, satisfied. "Okay," he said. "Can I have another cookie?" "Yes," Leigh said. She watched him cross the room. She thought about the question she had not asked Brooks in 2 months, the question she had built a case instead of asking. She thought about the answer that would have been, "I'm scared, and I'm trying to protect you." She thought about the answer she would have given him if he had asked her what she was doing when she mailed the envelope. The same answer. Scared, trying to protect something, doing it badly. She picked up her phone and called Brooks. He answered on the first ring. "I should have asked you," she said, "before any of it." "I should have told you," he said, "the first Thursday." A silence. "We're both terrible at this," she said. "We're both learning," he said. "That's different." She sat with that for a moment. "Yes," she said, "that's different." Cold Earring called on Sunday with something that changed the shape of everything. He had spent Saturday with the documentation Wren Calloway had provided. Not just the dossier, but the full architectural record of the Whitmore fund structure. He had a forensic document analyst review the credential forgeries. The analyst had found something. Leigh's credentials had not been the only ones forged into the structure. There was a second set, the professional license and firm registration of a financial examiner named Patrick Vaux, who had been, 2 years earlier, the lead examiner on a federal review of a Whitmore-adjacent fund that had been quietly closed before producing findings. Patrick Vaux had been transferred off the case 14 months ago, following an anonymous complaint to his regulatory board alleging professional misconduct. The complaint had been internally reviewed and dismissed, but the transfer had removed him from the Whitmore review before it concluded. The anonymous complaint had been filed from an account traceable, Cole's analyst had found, to the same IP infrastructure used to transmit the dossier to the SEC. June Whitmore had not just been using Leigh as a distraction. She had a pattern. She identified the financial professionals who posed a risk to her structures. Investigators, examiners, anyone with both the access and the competence to find what she had built. And she preemptively discredited them. She inserted their credentials into her documentation, then triggered complaints at the moment they got closest. Leigh was not the first. She was not even the second. Cole had identified 3 others over the past 5 years. All of them were professionals whose investigative trajectories had, at some point, intersected with Whitmore-linked funds. All of them had experienced professional complications, complaints, inquiries, transfers, one voluntary resignation, at moments that, mapped against the Whitmore structure's timeline, corresponded to points where their work was getting close. June Whitmore had been running a systematic professional destruction operation for at least 5 years. The SEC tip had not been a panic move. It was the playbook. "She's done this before," Leigh said. "At least 4 times that we can document," Cole said. "Probably more." "And the others didn't connect it," Leigh said. "They didn't have each other," Cole said. "They didn't know the pattern existed." Leigh was quiet. "They will now," she said. What Leigh Novak did in the 7 days following the Hotel Thursday was the most focused work of her professional life. She was, formally, on personal leave from her firm. The conflict of interest she had flagged required her to be off active caseloads until the situation resolved. This gave her 8 to 12 hours a day of unstructured time that she used with the specific efficiency of someone who has removed every other obligation. Cole Deering managed the legal architecture. He filed the subject access request. He contacted the SEC's intake officer's supervisor. Leigh's contact had, as promised, flagged the submission immediately, and the inquiry had been placed in a holding category pending review of the subject access request. The formal investigation had not yet opened. The window was narrow, but it existed. Ren Calloway's attorney communicated on Tuesday that his client was prepared to provide a full cooperative statement in exchange for consideration as a government witness. Cole accepted the terms. Leigh tracked down the other 4 professionals. It was not difficult. She knew how to find people in her industry, and once she had the names, the professional records were accessible. What took time was the conversations. 3 of them were still in the industry, carrying the residue of professional complications they had never fully understood. 1 had left practice entirely. She called each of them. She explained what she had found. The conversations were long, and for some of them, audibly painful. The specific pain of understanding, years later, that a thing that had felt like your own failure was not yours at all. By Friday, all 4 had agreed to provide documentation and, where relevant, testimony. Cole submitted the full evidentiary package to the SEC's Enforcement Division on Friday afternoon. Ren Calloway's cooperative statement, the 5 forged credential structures, the professional complaint records, mapped against the Whitmore Fund timeline, and the IP analysis connecting the anonymous complaint infrastructure to June Whitmore's operational network. It was not the most elegant case Cole had ever assembled. It was the most complete. He called Leigh when it was submitted. "It's in," he said. She was sitting at Petra's kitchen table, where she had been working for the past week. "Thank you," she said. "You did the work," he said. "I did the filing." She smiled, the first one in a week that arrived without effort. "Cole?" she said. "Yeah." "The 4 others. They deserve to know what happens." "I'll keep them informed," he said. "All 5 of you." All 5. Leigh thought about that. 5 financial professionals, separate careers, separate cities, connected by a woman who had decided they were useful as instruments of her own protection. She thought about what it meant to be that. She thought about what it meant to stop being it. Brooks came to Petra's apartment on Saturday. He had not been staying there. He had gone back to the brownstone, which Leigh had not. Not because of anything said between them, but because Leigh had needed the space of Petra's guest room to work, and that need had not ended simply because the Hotel Thursday was behind them. He brought dinner, Thai food from the restaurant 3 blocks from their apartment that they had been ordering from since the first month they lived together. Petra let him in, looked at him with the specific regard she reserved for people she was still evaluating, and went to the other room. They ate at Petra's kitchen table. Leigh said, "The cologne." Brooks set down his fork. "I need you to tell me," she said. "Not as an explanation, just, I need to understand what it was." Brooks was quiet for a moment. "When I was in law school," he said, "I had an interview that I knew would determine everything. The firm I had worked 3 years to get in front of. I bought the cologne the morning of the interview. I wore it because I needed to feel like the version of myself that could do what that day required." He paused. "I've kept it since. I wear it when I need to feel like that person." "And Thursdays," Leigh said. "Thursdays I was meeting a man who was threatening everything we had built," Brooks said, "and I was afraid, and I was trying to hold it together, and I couldn't tell you because I was afraid of what telling you would cost." He looked at his hands. "I wore it because it was the one thing I could do that felt like I was still myself." Leigh looked at her husband. She thought about the blank document she had started with. What do I know? She had not known this. She should have asked. "I cataloged it," she said. "The cologne on Thursdays. I put it in the case I was building." "I know," he said. "It was evidence of something it wasn't." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry I gave you a reason to build a case instead of a question." She looked at him. "And I'm sorry," she said, "that I built the case instead of asking you." A long silence. "The death notification," Brooks said. "Yes," she said. "We need to talk about that." "Yes," he said. "We do?" He looked at her across the table. "What I did when I got it," he said slowly, "was call you twice. Then I drove to end it with Calloway, because I thought, if you were gone, none of the rest of it was worth protecting." His voice shifted. "I didn't think about the accounts or the firm or the deal documentation. I thought about ending the thing that had kept me away from you for 12 Thursdays." Leigh held that. "I know," she said quietly. "I watched the calls come in. I saw the timing." "And I saw what you chose," she said, "when you thought I couldn't see." Brooks looked at his wife. "I would always choose you," he said. "I was just very bad at showing it this particular fall." "Yes," she said. "Very bad." "Are we?" "Yes," she said, before he could finish. "We are." He exhaled. They sat together at Petra's kitchen table and finished the Thai food and talked until Petra, at 11:30, emerged from the other room to get water and said, without looking at either of them, "You two are okay. I can tell because you've stopped being careful with each other." She went back to bed. Leigh looked at Brooks. "She's right," he said. "She usually is," Leigh said. Leigh Novak called Brooks on a Sunday morning and said she needed to see him, not Leigh, Brooks. This was notable because Dana called both of them together on most occasions. She was careful that way. She came to the brownstone. Leigh was back home by then and sat at the kitchen table and put a folder on the surface. "I need to tell you something," she said, "that I should have told you 3 months ago." Inside the folder was a series of printed email exchanges. Dana had been, for the past 2 years, doing contract paralegal work for a small legal firm in Midtown. The firm had handled, among other matters, corporate structuring work for private equity vehicles. One of those vehicles had been a Callaway Associated fund. She had not known the connection to Brooks when she took the work. She had not known the connection to Leigh when she began. But 3 months ago, she had processed a document set that included, in its appendix, a fiduciary authorization bearing Leigh's name. "I didn't understand what it meant," Dana said. "Leigh's name in a fund document. I thought maybe it was a consulting engagement she'd taken. But it felt wrong. And I didn't know if I was seeing something or making something out of nothing, and I didn't want to be the person who caused a problem in your marriage for something that turned out to be nothing." She looked at Brooks, then at Leigh. "I should have told you," she said. "Both of you." Leigh looked at the email exchanges. The documents Dana had processed 3 months ago would have been, had Leigh seen them then, 6 weeks of earlier warning. 6 weeks in which she might not have mailed an envelope. "Why didn't you come to me?" Leigh said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. "Because I thought if I was wrong, I'd have destroyed your trust in Brooks for nothing," Dana said. "And if I was right," she stopped. "I was scared of what being right meant." The kitchen held this. Leigh looked at Dana. "Next time," Leigh said carefully, "come to me. Whatever the cost of being wrong, the cost of not telling me was higher." Dana nodded. She looked at the table. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," Leigh said. "Me too." She meant it for all of them, herself included. It was becoming a theme. June Whitmore was served at her apartment on Central Park West on a Tuesday morning. She opened the door herself. Her housekeeper was off Tuesday mornings, which Cole Deering's office had confirmed through the building's service records, because Cole Deering did not leave the timing of significant moments to chance. She took the documents. She looked at them. She looked at the 2 federal agents standing behind Cole's associate. She said nothing for approximately 15 seconds. Then she said, "I'd like to call my attorney." Cole's associate said, "Of course." June Whitmore's attorney arrived within 30 minutes, a senior partner from a Wall Street firm whose involvement confirmed, in the way that the choice of attorney always confirms, that she had understood the seriousness of the situation immediately. The SEC's formal investigation had opened that morning, triggered by the enforcement package Cole had submitted Friday, and accelerated by the cooperative statement from Ren Callaway, which had been, his attorney had communicated, comprehensive. Ren Callaway had named every transaction, every forged credential, every professional complaint, every timeline. He had done so, his attorney noted, not because he had been offered significant consideration, but because, and this was the part that surprised Cole Deering, who thought he had seen most of what motivated people in these situations. He had, in his 12 weeks of meetings with Brooks Novak, developed a genuine regard for the man he had been sent to threaten. He had not wanted to destroy him. He had been afraid of June Whitmore in the specific way that people are afraid of architects, people who build the structure you live inside, and who therefore control what happens when the structure fails. When Leigh had walked into that hotel room and made it clear that the structure had already been identified, Ren Callaway had experienced something he described to his attorney as relief, the same word Brooks had used to describe the moment he saw Leigh in the doorway. June Whitmore, for her part, did not appear to experience relief. She appeared to experience the specific, carefully managed composure of a woman who has spent 30 years being the most prepared person in every room, and has arrived, finally, in a room where being prepared is no longer an available strategy. Her attorney filed a motion for discovery the following week. The discovery process would take months. The trial, when it came, would be public. Her name would be, as she had spent 30 years ensuring it was not, at the front of things. In the months between the formal SEC investigation opening and the trial date, Leigh did something she had not planned. She called the 4 other professionals again. Not about the case. Cole managed the case communications. She called about something else. She called to ask if they wanted to build something. What she had in mind was a practice, a small, independent consulting group focused specifically on the kind of financial fraud that targeted professional credentials. The insertion of licensed professionals into fraudulent documentation structures without their knowledge or consent. It was a niche so specific that no existing practice had dedicated resources to it. It was also, as the Whitmore case had demonstrated, more common than anyone had previously documented. 3 of the 4 said yes immediately. The 4th took 2 weeks and then called back and said yes. Leigh gave her notice at Harwick and Dean on a Friday in February. Her supervising partner was not surprised. "You've been working toward this for 11 years, he said. "You were always going to end up building your own thing." "I didn't know that," she said. "I did," he said. "The day you walked in here and pointed out the error in the intake methodology before you'd been here a week." He paused. "Go build it right." She went home. She told Brooks. He looked at her across the kitchen table. Their kitchen table in their brownstone on a Friday evening in February, when the light was gray and the city outside was doing what it always did. "Tell me about it," he said. She told him about it. He listened with the specific, focused attention that had been the first thing she had noticed about him at a professional conference 11 years ago. The quality of his listening, the way he was entirely present to whatever she was saying. "This is good," he said when she finished. "It might not work," she said. "Most things that are good might not work," he said. "That's not a reason." She looked at him. "No," she said. "It's not?" Wren Calloway's cooperation agreement required him to provide full documentation, testimony, and a detailed account of the Whitmore Fund's operations over 7 years. He provided all of it. He also did something his attorney had not required. He wrote a letter. It was addressed to Leigh. Cole Deering's office forwarded it with a note. "I don't usually send these, but I think this one is worth reading." The letter was 3 pages, handwritten. Not the penmanship of a man who wrote by hand often, but the effort visible in the care of it. It described, in specific terms, the 12 weeks of Thursday meetings with Brooks. It described what he had expected from those meetings. Compliance, capitulation, a man grinding down under sustained pressure. It described what he had found instead. He wrote, "Your husband sat in that room every Thursday for 12 weeks and refused. Not loudly, not dramatically. He just said no and kept coming back, and every week I understood a little better that I was not going to get what I was sent to get. I'm not sure I understood why until the night you walked in." He paused in the letter. She could see where the pen had lifted and returned. "You walked in, and the room changed because you knew exactly what to do, and he knew you would. That's not something you manufacture. That's something you build over a long time and then rely on when the structure is tested." He wrote, "I am sorry for my part in this. I am sorry it took me 12 weeks to understand that the correct decision was the one I eventually made. I hope the letter is something. Leigh read it twice. She set it on the kitchen table. Brooks came in and saw her expression. "What is it?" he said. She handed him the letter. He read it. He set it down. They looked at each other across the table. "He's not wrong," Leigh said. "No," Brooks said. "He's not." She picked up the letter. She folded it carefully. She put it in the drawer where she kept things she wanted to keep. June Whitmore's trial ran for 11 days. Cole Deering had been right about one thing. It was public. Significantly, continuously public. The kind of financial fraud trial that attracted sustained attention because of the specific nature of the scheme, the number of victims, and the methodical quality of the evidence that Cole's office and Leigh's documentation had made available. June Whitmore's attorney mounted a defense centered on the claim that the credential insertions had been the work of Wren Calloway, operating independently, without her knowledge or direction. The documentary evidence made this argument difficult. The IP analysis made it impossible. Wren Calloway's testimony, delivered in 2 days, precise and complete, in the specific manner of a man who had decided that being thorough was the only remaining form of dignity available to him, made it collapse entirely. June Whitmore was convicted on 9 counts. The sentencing would come later. The financial penalties were substantial. The professional consequences were permanent. On the day the verdict came in, Leigh was in her new office, a converted space in a building on West 25th Street that she had leased 6 weeks earlier and was in the process of making functional. The walls still had the marks from the previous tenant's shelving. Cole Deering called. "Guilty on all counts," he said. "All 9, she said. "All 9. She sat at her desk, a desk she had bought herself, specifically without history, and looked at the window that faced the street. She thought about the 4 other professionals. She had already texted them. 3 had responded within minutes. The 4th had called. She thought about the county records administrator named Rosa, who had made a formatted document with no legal standing that had, in the event, produced a chain of consequences that had nothing to do with what Leigh had intended when she mailed it. She thought about the man who had been wearing cologne on Thursday evenings because he was afraid. She thought about what she had concluded from that and what she had not asked. She thought about what you lose and what you build, and whether those 2 things are always in proportion, and she decided that they were not. That sometimes you lose something small and build something large, and sometimes you lose something large and find, on the other side of it, something you did not know you had been missing. She called Brooks. "It's done," she said. "I know," he said. "Cole called me too." "Are you—" "Yes," he said. "I'm fine. Are you?" She looked around her new office, the bare walls, the desk she had chosen herself. "Yes," she said, "I am." Spring came to Manhattan the way it always does, the city deciding all at once that it has waited long enough. Leigh's practice, formally incorporated as Novak Credential Group, which was not a glamorous name but was an accurate one, had its first 3 clients by April. All 3 were referrals from financial professionals who had heard about the Whitmore case and understood, in the specific way that people who have experienced something similar understand it, what the practice was for. The 5 founding members worked from the West 25th Street office on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On the other days, they were remote, which was practical and also meant that Leigh was home on Thursdays. Not every Thursday, but most of them. Brooks came home on the Thursdays. She was home at a reasonable hour. He stopped wearing the cologne specifically on Thursdays. Not because she had asked him to, but because Thursdays were no longer frightening, and the cologne was for frightening things. He wore it on their anniversary in March. She had bought a new bottle and left it on his side of the bathroom shelf. The old one was nearly empty. He had looked at it for a moment and then at her and smiled. "Same one?" he said. "Same one?" she said. Felix came to visit in April with Dana and immediately assessed the state of the apartment and the adults inside it, with the comprehensive attention of an 8-year-old who considers himself the unofficial monitor of the situation. "You're normal again," he said, to no one in particular. "Thank you, Felix," Leigh said. "Uncle Brooks is making the good pasta," he said, heading toward the kitchen. "The kind with the crispy cheese on top." "Yes," she said. "Important," he said. She followed him into the kitchen, where Brooks was doing exactly what Felix had predicted, and Dana was sitting at the table pretending she wasn't watching both of them, with the expression of a person who had spent months carrying something she shouldn't have carried alone, and is still, quietly, grateful to be in the room. Leigh sat across from her. Dana looked at her. "I'm still sorry," Dana said. "I know," Leigh said. "It's okay." "It really is?" "It really is," Leigh said. "We figured it out." Dana looked at her brother, who was doing something to the cheese with a level of focus that Felix appeared to find both excessive and correct. "He's a good person," Dana said. "I know," Leigh said. "He was so scared," Dana said quietly. "The whole fall. He just didn't want you caught in it." "I know," Leigh said. "He told me." "And you?" Dana paused. "The death thing. He called me when he got it, before he did anything else. He called me, and he said he didn't know what to do, and then he said, 'Actually, I do know what to do.' And he hung up." Leigh looked at her sister-in-law. "He went to end it," she said. "He went to end it," Dana said, "because the rest of it stopped mattering." The kitchen was warm. The pasta was almost done. Felix was providing unsolicited advisory opinions on the cheese distribution. Outside the brownstone windows, the city was producing the specific sound of a Thursday evening in April. Not remarkable, not quiet, just present. Leigh looked around the kitchen, at her husband, who was listening to his nephew's cheese opinions with the patient attention of a man who has learned, at some cost, to be present. At Dana, who had carried something too long and was still in the process of putting it down. At the kitchen itself, their kitchen, with its years of ordinary mornings and take-out containers and late evenings, and the coffee maker that had been replaced twice, and the shelf where the cologne lived. She thought about the word enough. She thought about how long she had been running from incomplete information toward cases she could finish. She thought about how long it had taken her to understand that the most important case was not the one she built on her own. It was the one she built with him. Outside, the city continued. Inside, the pasta was done. "Okay," Brooks said, setting the pan on the table. "Everyone sit down." Felix was already seated. Everyone sat down. It was a Thursday in April. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in the only way that mattered, everything. If you've stayed with us all the way here, and I mean truly stayed, not just had this playing in the background, then something in this story reached you. Maybe it was the Thursday cologne. Maybe it was Felix and his pasta barometer. Maybe it was the moment Leigh stood in that hallway, listening through a door, and heard something she had not prepared herself for. here's what I keep coming back to. Epictetus, who had been a slave before he became one of the most important philosophers in Western history, said this: "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." Leigh didn't choose to be inserted into a fraud scheme. She didn't choose 12 weeks of her husband's silence. But at every moment where something could have broken permanently, she chose the question over the conclusion, the conversation over the case, the person over the evidence. That's the whole story, not the verdict, not the conviction, not the new office or the practice or any of the external things. The moment she picked up the phone and said, "I should have asked you. If this story moved you today, please hit like, share it with someone you've been meaning to call, and subscribe so we can keep walking through these stories together." Ask the question before you build the case. Every time. You already know who to call. This story is entirely fictional and was created solely for entertainment, dramatic storytelling, and emotional reflection. All characters, including Leigh Novak, Brooks Novak, Ren Calloway, June Whitmore, Cole Deering, Dana Novak, Felix, Petra Osi, and all others depicted, are completely fictional and bear no resemblance to any real individuals, living or deceased. The Novak Credential Group, Harwick and Dean, Calloway Whitmore Capital, and all organizations and firms depicted are entirely invented. Any resemblance to real persons, real organizations, real legal cases, or real financial schemes is entirely coincidental. The legal and regulatory proceedings, document forgery, and financial fraud structures depicted have been dramatized for narrative purposes and do not represent accurate portrayals of real legal processes. This content does not encourage or endorse any illegal activity. This story is intended to explore themes of trust, marriage, professional integrity, and resilience through dramatic fiction. Thank you for watching thoughtfully.